Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bridge to Success. Most decisions we make don't come with perfect information. You rarely know what the other side is thinking, and you can't see the full picture. And yet, you still have to act, often quickly, under pressure, and knowing you might be wrong. What separates good decision makers from great ones isn't certainty, it's how they think in those moments of uncertainty. And that's exactly what the game of bridge trains you to do. Today's guest takes that idea even further, from building a multi-million dollar art business, to becoming a bridge world champion, to working in strategy consulting at Bain. Her journey sits at the intersection of creativity, logic, and decision making. Sylvia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
So, your path has been incredibly unconventional, from being an anime artist to world champion bridge player to consulting at Bain. If you had to summarize your story, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, so definitely I think I've done three pretty major things that many other people you may that might be your entire career. But I think if I had to segment my life, honestly, there's two phases. So the first phase of my life, maybe I call it like the convenience phase. And it's a little weird. I'll explain it. And then the second phase of my life is more like the focus phase. So, what I mean by that is for the first two things that I did, which is doing my artwork and then also playing bridge, it was almost just out of convenience that I started doing it. So I never, as a child or even in college I was pre-med, I never really thought that I would do art for a living. Like I was from a Chinese family, so I was told I should be a doctor. And so that's why I was pre-med. I was on my way to being a doctor. And then what ended up happening with the artwork was that I went to the convention. So I would sell artwork at conventions. But before I did that, I went to a convention as attendee once. I saw, hey, there's people selling artwork. I do artwork. Let me just get a booth and, just sell casually. And then I think my first convention I was in college and I made $1,000 or something. It wasn't, but at that time, it was a lot of money. And I was like, wow, that's great. And then I just kept doing conventions and it really scaled massively, I think. My third convention, I think I made like $10,000. And these
Oh, wow.
conventions, for the context, is like they're 3 days long usually. So for me being in college, this was just a ton of money. And
Right.
so then I was like, well, I should clearly do this because it's very lucrative. So I did that and continued doing that for a while. And then similarly with bridge, I had some free time and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to learn bridge. And this wasn't really, again, it wasn't with any intention of having bridge as a career. But then I played it as a hobby and I got pretty good at it. And I think that so the one thing that most people don't know is in professional bridge, there's no prize money. So if you are looking at it from the outside, you wouldn't really know how is anyone making money here. But what happens is that when you get quite good, people actually ask you to play with them and train them and they'll pay you. And these are generally people who are very wealthy. And it's actually, again, quite a good business or an area. And so I kind of fell into that too, which is I just got good and then people started asking me and I was like, well, this is great. I love bridge. And what is better than playing the card game that I love and getting paid for it? So that was like the first two things.
Mhm.
I think the consulting situation was a bit different. So the one thing about bridge that I had felt was that even though I really enjoyed it, I also felt it was a very small part of the world. Like it's very niche. And I was getting, had been a lot of years, and I just kind of felt like I wanted to know more about the world. And so then I specifically targeted trying to go into consulting as a way to one is experience what corporate life is like. Because it was funny to me at that time, if you asked me, hey, what do people who work in jobs do? I had no idea. Like I just
Mhm.
had no idea what a normal job was like. And so then I went and got my MBA, and I targeted consulting. And this was a very, very specific thing that I tried for. And I was lucky enough that I actually had no idea if I had any chance at getting in a top consulting firm because I had no traditional work experience. But luckily, actually, consulting, if you are thinking about consulting, it is an industry that doesn't really care if you have background in consulting. It more so cares if you've just shown that you've been consistent and good at what you were doing before. So a bit long-winded, but I think that that was sort of how my journey happened to get to where I
Right.
am now.
No, I think that's an amazing story because it makes sense. After playing bridge for like so many years, you would definitely want experience of like the corporate world and just learning more things, learning new things specifically. So circling back to bridge, it's ultimately about making decisions under uncertainty and with incomplete information. So do you think that actually shaped how you approach real world decisions? And maybe there's a specific moment at Bain where you approached a problem like a bridge hand?
Yeah. So I think that there are definitely a lot of things that playing bridge can teach you about decision making, the world in general. I think that so for me, one of the key factors about decision making in bridge is making sure that you understand what all the information that you have is.
Mhm.
So, I think for those of you who have or haven't played a bridge hand, the way that you play a bridge hand correctly is by actually using all the clues that you've gathered throughout the entire for the auction, through the play, and then just figuring out, what the right thing to do is, and then sort of supporting that with what you know about what is percentage. So in terms of consulting, I think that the information gathering part is very much aligned to bridge. And
Mhm.
it is a matter of gathering a lot of different elements from a lot of different sources, putting that together, and then the final piece of that is structuring it in a way where you're not missing information, but then you're
Mhm.
also assigning the proper weights to each of the pieces of information because, something like I'll give a very specific example, which is let's say that you are playing against a player who is not very strong and they do something where you would have assumed that when they do this thing, like let's say, they bid you bid four spades, they bid five hearts. If sometimes you would assume that, okay, they have more distribution or more high card points or a stronger hand or, just something that to make them want to bid. But if you know that they're a weaker player, then you might also say, well, this information is less valuable to me because I'm not as confident that they know what they're doing. So the information that becomes more relevant here for your decision is like, well, what would they do in the play that would be more likely if they were weaker, things like that. And then I think that that translates into consulting too, because you're going to get, reliable data, unreliable data, and you have to just put it all together.
Right. And this ability to deal with uncertainty,
Mhm.
I think that would separate a world-class bridge player from just a good one. What do you think is the real skill that elite players do that others may not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in order to be an elite player, you basically need two things. The first thing everyone would know, it's talent, and the second thing is consistency. So talent in bridge means a combination of memory, analytical skill, people reading, and also it's just something called card sense, which the only way I can describe it is if I show you a set of cards and I'm ex try to explain to you how the cards actually work together. Some people get it and some don't. And it's the most bizarre thing, but that is what it is. But I think the biggest thing that separates a truly elite player really is the consistency because you so the way that bridge is structured I view it as you have there's like maybe a handful of like 5 to 10, like these are like the very top players. But then there's like a larger number of professional elite world championship level players. And then there's a bunch of flight A players that are quite strong and they know, all the same core skills, they know all the percentages. And the big difference between the flight A players and the elite players is really just the consistency. Because sometimes you have the flight A players and you can beat pros on any given day. But when you're playing in the course of a match, like put 96 bridge hands, you
Mhm.
need to get all of them right, or like most of them right. You cannot only be getting some of them right.
Yes, for sure. So, like, you've competed and won 7 national championships and a world championship as well. Since you've played at the highest level, the margins are incredibly thin. So, what's
Yeah.
the most high pressure moment that you faced in a tournament?
Yeah, and also it's 8 national championships now. I forgot to update it since
Oh,
last
wow.
fall. But so I think I'll preface this by saying that I'm actually generally better at pressure. And the reason is that when I don't feel the pressure, I don't try as hard. And I'm this is something that I've actually been working on is forcing myself to try harder at every phase, no matter if it's like a critical world championship event or just playing at the club or whatever. But I mean, you can kind of see that it's similar to, in everyday life. If you know something's important, you're typically going to try harder. So the pressure makes me try harder. And I think one of the things that makes pressure really stressful to people is knowing that your decisions are really impactful and then fearing failing. And I think that for me, I don't fear the failure. It's like I've made my peace with the fact that even if I'm the one who is literally causing my team to lose, then you know what? It's fine. Like it's just cards in the end. So that's the first thing. I think that to your actual question, which is what was the most high pressure moment, it probably has to be the first world championship that I played, which was actually the one that we won. And the reason that it was high pressure was well, obviously world championships, first one, and I had no idea how good I was relative to the field or anything like that. And I also knew that our team had a really, really good chance of winning. So the great thing about that World Championships though is that even though it was high pressure, we actually won all our matches by a quite large margin. So it was like the way that it was structured, there's six sets in each match, and typically we would go in and we would win the first set by like quite a large margin, lose back a little in the second set, which was typically the set that I was sitting out. So that was the most stressful for me is like when I couldn't do anything. Then in the third set, we would come back in and we would win back a little more. Then we would lose back some in the fourth set. And then when the fifth set, we would be sitting out and the rest of the team would just like totally crush it. So there was never actually a moment where, you're getting into the sixth round and you're like, oh my God, it's really close. Like we were just way up. But still, I think that it just imagining that you have something that you really want that's so close and then feeling like you can achieve it if you just do well. I think that was probably the
Right,
highest stress.
that's amazing. So you definitely don't overthink in any situations like this. Um, in both bridge and consulting, as you said, you're dealing with uncertainty and you have to have that intuition to make decisions. So how do you kind of make decisions when there's uncertainty and you don't have all the information? What's the kind of process that you work through in your head?
Yeah. So I think when you don't have all the information, there's two important factors you have to think about. The first is you want to go with the odds. But the second thing you have to think about is what are the potential outcomes of your decision. So going with the odds should be like your first decision, your first point is like, okay, I don't know everything, but I know that generally this person feels this. So let me take it into a consulting perspective, which is, sometimes you are making a slide deck for a client and you have to decide what is the message that you're putting on the page. And probably you've had some previous touch points with the client and you're gathering the information, you're pre-wiring the client so that they know what to expect. But for some reason you have ended in a scenario where you're not able to get their input and you have to present to them in a meeting. So then if let's say that the client tends to like, let's say slides that have big, key information points and tends to like not like a lot of text or whatever, you can sort of go in that direction. And then if you know that the client probably will enjoy, if like they probably have some objectives that they care about, you can lean towards showing them on that page. But then the second thing that you should think about is, well, if you get it wrong, then what is the bad outcome that could happen? And so this can be, well, let's say you're deciding a data point, whether to show it or not. Then you can say, well, if I show the data point and it's wrong, even if it's percentage that it's right, it could be a big disaster because then people could just get misled in the wrong way. And then if I don't show the data point, it might look like we're a little bit behind in terms of where our analysis is, but the rest of the slide deck is good, and then it removes that risk of having a really bad outcome. So I think like that kind of like, and the way that happens in bridge sometimes, by the way, is if you are, let's say you're in 4 hearts and you can think that you have a play to make an over trick. So you can make 10 tricks just making your contract, or you can make 11 tricks, but it's not guaranteed. And so sometimes you have to decide, okay, well, let's say you think that making the 11 tricks is actually 75%. So usually you would go for that. However, if you're already in a scenario where you know that no one else is going to have bid to 4 hearts, which is the game, then you should just make your contract.
Right. And I think even things like vulnerability would also affect your decision making, because sometimes you'll just or even if it's IMPs versus MPs, rather than taking the over trick, you might just settle to make your 10 tricks. And
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So I think this is where like your intuition kind of comes into play.